All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're going underwater, kinda. We're diving deep into the world of breathing mechanics.
Breathing mechanics, fascinating stuff.
You know it. For this one, you sent over some excerpts from, what was it called? Breathingmechanics.pdf.
That's the one?
Okay, perfect. You know, it's funny how we breathe, what, like a gazillion times a day, but probably never really think about what's going on inside, right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you stop and think about it.
So true. I mean, our bodies are basically doing all this intricate stuff automatically.
Right. Like without even thinking about it, our respiratory system's working hand in hand with our circulatory system.
Oh, yeah, the circulatory system. Gotta have that.
Absolutely. Keeps those cells alive and kicking.
Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, maybe we should back up a bit.
Sounds good?
So, the document you sent over starts by talking about these 4 key respiratory processes. I think those are a good place to start, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. They're the foundations for understanding, like, how breathing actually works. It's all about the respiratory system and the circulatory system.
Yeah, you've got the lungs bringing in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide.
Right. And then the circulatory system swoops in and transports those gases throughout the body. Oxygen to the cells, carbon dioxide back to the lungs.
So it's like a constant exchange happening.
Exactly. A perfectly choreographed dance.
Okay, so walk me through these 4 processes. I'm all ears.
Well, the first one is pulmonary ventilation.
Pulmonary ventilation.
Yeah, which is basically the act of breathing itself.
Air in, air out.
Exactly. Then we have external respiration.
Which is where the lungs are doing their thing.
Yeah, they're the stars of the show in this one. It's all about the gas exchange happening in the lungs. Oxygen from the air we breathe goes into the blood, and carbon dioxide from the blood is released.
Gotcha, so it's like a swap meet in there.
Ha, kind of. Then comes the transport of respiratory gases, which is where the circulatory system takes over. It's like a super efficient delivery service, transporting that oxygen from the lungs to every single cell in the body.
Wow, talk about a long delivery route.
No kidding. And it doesn't stop there. It also has to bring the carbon dioxide back to the lungs to be exhaled.
Busy system. So what's the last process?
The grand finale. Internal respiration.
Internal respiration.
That's where oxygen gets delivered to its final destination, the cells, and carbon dioxide is picked up.
So it's like a final handoff.
Exactly.
Amazing. Okay, so we've got those 4 processes down, but I'm curious, how does the air actually move in and out? I saw Boyle's law mentioned in the source material.
Oh, Boyle's law. That's a good one.
Yeah, I remember it from high school science, but I'm a bit fuzzy on the details.
Well, think about it like squeezing a balloon.
Okay.
When you squeeze a balloon, you decrease the volume, right?
Yeah, you're pushing all that air into a smaller space.
Exactly. And that increases the pressure inside. Boyle's law basically says that volume and pressure are inversely proportional.
So less space equals more pressure.
You got it. And the same principle applies to breathing. When your chest expands, the volume inside your lungs increases.
Okay.
And that creates lower pressure compared to the air outside.
So the air rushes in to equalize the pressure?
Exactly. It's like when you open a vacuum seal bag, whoosh, all that air rushes in.
That makes sense. It's amazing how our bodies create those pressure changes so effortlessly.
It's a pretty remarkable system for sure. And the MVP of this pressure-changing magic is your diaphragm.
The diaphragm, I remember that from anatomy class.
It's a powerhouse, basically a sheet of muscle separating your chest cavity from your abdominal cavity.
Right, right.
Now, when you inhale, that diaphragm contracts and flattens out, pulling the bottom of your chest cavity downward.
Okay.
And that increases the volume in your chest, which, thanks to Boyle's law, decreases the pressure inside.
So air rushes in.
You got it. Like a perfectly timed symphony.
This is making so much more sense now. But I'm trying to picture it all. What about the lungs themselves? Like, how do they get pulled open along with the chest?
Good question. So you've got these 2 membranes, the visceral pleura, which is attached to the lungs, and the parietal pleura, which lines the chest cavity.
2 membranes. Okay.
Yeah. Now, as your chest expands, the visceral pleura clings to the parietal pleura.
They cling together like...
It's kind of like 2 pieces of plastic wrap sticking together.
Oh, okay, I get it.
So when the chest wall moves, the lungs expand along with it.
So it's all synchronized.
Precisely. And this whole clinging together business actually decreases the pressure in the space between those 2 membranes, the pleural cavity.
We're talking about intrapleural pressure now, right?
You got it. And that intrapleural pressure is what helps keep your lungs inflated.
Okay, so we've got atmospheric pressure outside, intrapulmonary pressure inside the lungs, and now intrapleural pressure around the lungs.
You're keeping up. It's all about those pressure differences, really.
So just to clarify, the diaphragm contracts, pulls down on the chest, the pressure drops, and whoosh, air rushes in. And those membranes, they help keep the lungs inflated with that intrapleural pressure.
Exactly. You nailed it.
Cool. I'm starting to feel like a breathing mechanics expert myself.
Well, you're well on your way.
Okay, so inhalation makes sense now, but what about exhalation? Does the diaphragm do something different when we breathe out?
That's the crazy part. During normal breathing, exhalation is mostly passive.
Passive.
Like your body's doing it without you even thinking about it. As the diaphragm relaxes, it goes back to its dome shape, and the lungs and chest wall, they naturally recoil.
So they just spring back.
Exactly. And that pushes the air back out.
So we don't have to, like, consciously relax the diaphragm.
Nope, it just kind of happens as part of the cycle. As the volume in your chest decreases, the intrapulmonary pressure increases.
Forcing the air out?
Until the pressure inside the lungs matches the atmospheric pressure outside. Pretty neat, huh?
Super neat. It's remarkable how it all just works without us having to micromanage every breath.
Definitely. So to recap, we inhale, the diaphragm contracts, air rushes in. We exhale, the diaphragm relaxes, and air flows out. All thanks to those pressure gradients.
And this is all considered quiet breathing, right?
Yep, quiet breathing. It's like the default setting for our respiratory system when we're just chilling, But, of course, there are times when we need to breathe more forcefully.
Like when we're working out or something?
Exactly. Or, if you're trying to blow out all the candles on a cake in one go.
So our bodies have a backup system for those situations.
You could say that. We've got other muscles that can kick in to help with those more forceful inhalations and exhalations.
This is so cool. Okay, before we go any further, though, I got to ask about this lung compliance thing that keeps popping up in the source material. What's that all about?
Lung compliance, basically it's how easily your lung tissue stresses, like how much effort it takes to inflate those lungs.
So if someone has low lung compliance, does that mean their lungs are kind of stiff?
Exactly. It's like trying to inflate one of those thick, heavy-duty balloons.
Yeah, those are tough. So low compliance means you got to work harder to breathe.
You got it. And high compliance, well, that's like inflating a regular party balloon. Super easy.
So our lungs want to be more like party balloons. Got it.
Haha, pretty much. And you know who deserves a big shout out for making all this happen? The diaphragm. It's responsible for like 75% of the work during normal breathing.
Wow, 75%. That's a lot. But what about the other 25%? Are there other muscles involved too?
Absolutely. We've got those external intercostal muscles. Those are the muscles between your ribs. They help lift the rib cage when you inhale.
So they're like diaphragm's backup singers.
Ha ha ha, you could say that. It's all about teamwork in the respiratory system.
This is fascinating. I never realized how much was going on every time we breathe.
Right. It really is incredible.
I feel like I've learned so much already, and we've only just scratched the surface.
That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, I think we need a little breather before we dive any deeper into the world of breathing.
A breather, I like it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into breathing mechanics. So before the break, we were talking about all the muscles and the pressure changes that make breathing happen.
Right, all the ins and outs of how air gets into our lungs.
Exactly. But the document you sent also mentioned different types of breathing, not just quiet breathing.
Oh yeah, there's a whole repertoire of breathing patterns our bodies can use.
It's pretty amazing how adaptable our respiratory system is, huh?
For sure. Like, think about it. We've mostly been talking about quiet breathing, the kind we do when we're just relaxing.
Right, like right now.
But when we need to, our bodies can switch to different breathing styles, depending on what we're doing.
That makes sense. So what are some of these other breathing types? How do they differ from quiet breathing?
Well, one you've probably heard of is diaphragmatic breathing.
Diaphragmatic breathing, yeah, I've heard that.
It's all about being mindful and intentionally using your diaphragm to breathe, like really deeply.
So it's not just about the diaphragm doing its usual thing. It's like we're consciously controlling it.
Yeah, exactly. It's often used in things like yoga and meditation.
Right. I've heard it can help reduce stress and all that.
It could be very relaxing, yeah. When you focus on those slow, deep breaths, it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system.
Which is the rest and digest system.
Exactly. So it's like a natural chill pill, basically.
I like it. What other types of breathing are there?
Well, there's costal breathing, which focuses more on the movement of your ribs.
Oh, so the external intercostal muscles are playing a bigger role in this one.
Yep. You'll notice a lot more rib movement with costal breathing. It's often used when we need to take deeper breaths, like when we're exercising.
So our bodies naturally switch to costal breathing when our muscles need more oxygen.
Pretty much. It's all about maximizing that chest expansion to get more air in.
It's like we're shifting gears breathing-wise.
Exactly. So we've got diaphragmatic breathing, which emphasizes the diaphragm, and coastal breathing, which focuses on the rib cage. What if we combine those two?
Oh, interesting. Is that like a thing?
It is. It's called eupnea, and it's considered the most efficient and natural way to breathe.
Eupnea. Okay, gotta remember that one. So it's like the best of both worlds.
Exactly. A harmonious blend of diaphragmatic and costal breathing.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the document also mentions something called forced breathing.
Ah, yes, forced breathing. That's when we're putting in some extra effort to breathe, either inhaling or exhaling more forcefully.
Like when you're trying to blow up a really tough balloon?
Exactly. Or like we talked about before, when you're exercising and need more oxygen, your body recruits additional muscles to help out the diaphragm and intercostal muscles.
It's like calling in the reserves.
Haha, yeah. So for a really forceful inhalation, you might use muscles in your neck, like the sternocleidomastoids and scalenes, or even the pectoralis minor in your chest. These muscles help lift the rib cage even higher.
So it's a whole team effort. And what about for a forced exhalation?
Well, then you've got your abdominal muscles and the internal intercostal muscles joining the party. They help squeeze the air out more forcefully.
Wow, it's amazing how many muscles are involved in breathing when you really think about it. But how does our body know when to call in these extra muscles?
That's a great question. It's pretty complex, but one of the key factors is the level of carbon dioxide in your blood.
Carbon dioxide, that's the stuff we're trying to get rid of when we breathe, right?
Exactly. And as our muscles worked, they produce more carbon dioxide. It's like a byproduct of energy production.
Okay.
Now, your brain and blood vessels, they have these special sensors that are constantly monitoring the carbon dioxide levels in your blood.
That they're like little carbon dioxide detectors.
Yep. And when those levels get too high, they send a signal to your respiratory control center in the brainstem.
And the brainstem, that's like the control center for breathing, right?
Exactly. It's like the conductor of the breathing orchestra.
So the more carbon dioxide, the faster and deeper we breathe to get rid of it.
You got it. It's a beautiful feedback loop that helps keep our bodies in balance.
It's like our body is constantly monitoring and adjusting to make sure everything's running smoothly.
Exactly. It's all part of homeostasis, the delicate balance our bodies strive for.
This is fascinating stuff. I'm curious, though, are there any other factors besides carbon dioxide levels that affect how we breathe?
Definitely. Remember airway resistance?
Airway resistance, right? That's the friction that air encounters as it travels through our respiratory system.
Exactly. And the amount of resistance can affect how easily we breathe.
So if your airways are narrower, there's more resistance.
Yep. It's like trying to drink a milkshake through a tiny straw.
Ooh, that's a good analogy. So what can cause those airways to narrow?
Well, a lot of things, actually. The most obvious one is the diameter of the airways themselves. Like if you have asthma, the muscles around your airways can constrict, making it harder to breathe.
Right. That's why asthma medications often focus on relaxing those muscles and opening up the airways.
Exactly. But other things can play a role too, like mucus buildup, inflammation, even foreign objects.
I can see how all of those things could create more friction and make breathing more difficult.
Definitely. So airway resistance is definitely something to keep in mind when we're talking about breathing mechanics.
Okay, I'm adding that to my mental checklist. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up this part. The document mentioned lung volumes and capacities. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. Think of them like different ways to measure how much air our lungs can hold.
Okay, like we're measuring the capacity of a container.
Exactly. So you've got your basic lung volumes like tidal volume, which we've talked about before.
Right, that's the amount of air we breathe in and out during a normal breath.
Yep, typically around 500 milliliters. But then you've also got inspiratory reserve volume, which is the extra volume you can breathe in after a normal inhale.
So that's like taking a deep breath and seeing how much more you can squeeze in.
Exactly. And on the exhale side, you have expiratory reserve volume.
Which is the extra air you can force out after a normal exhale.
You got it. It's like seeing how much air you can blow out after you think you've already exhaled everything.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. Are there any other lung volumes?
One more. It's called residual volume, and it's the air that stays in your lungs even after you've exhaled as much as you can.
Wait, so even when we think our lungs are empty, there's still some air left?
That's right. It helps keep those tiny air sacs in the lungs, the alveoli, from collapsing. Plus, it ensures there's always a little bit of oxygen available for gas exchange.
That's fascinating. So how do lung capacities fit into all of this?
Well, think of lung capacities as combinations of two or more lung volumes. For example, vital capacity, one of the most important lung capacities, measures the maximum amount of air you can exhale after taking the deepest breath possible.
So it's like a measure of our lungs' total usable space, basically.
Pretty much. It tells us a lot about overall lung health.
Wow, we've covered so much ground today. I'm really starting to appreciate the complexity of breathing.
Right. It's a truly amazing system.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours, but unfortunately we're running out of time.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun with breathing mechanic.
It really does. Okay, so I think we need to take another quick break before we wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back for the final part of our breathing mechanics deep dive. It's been quite a journey so far.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground.
So before the break, you mentioned we'd be talking about how external factors can impact our respiratory system.
Right. Thinking about everything we've discussed, especially lung compliance, I think it's important to address the effects of smoking.
Yeah, smoking, definitely can't ignore that when we're talking about breathing.
Absolutely. It's a major risk factor for so many respiratory problems.
So based on what we know about lung compliance, smoking basically makes the lungs stiffer and less stretchy, right?
Exactly. All those harmful chemicals in cigarette smoke, they damage the delicate tissues in the lungs, causing inflammation and scarring.
It's kind of like what we were talking about before with pulmonary fibrosis.
Yeah, good comparison. The lungs become less elastic, and it takes a lot more effort to breathe.
And that means the respiratory muscles have to work harder, right?
Exactly. It can lead to shortness of breath, fatigue, all sorts of problems.
It's like trying to inflate a balloon that's lost its stretchiness.
Perfect analogy. And the sad part is, a lot of the damage caused by smoking is irreversible.
That's why quitting is so important.
Couldn't agree more. It's one of the best things you can do for your lungs. The sooner you quit, the better.
It's good to know that the lungs can heal, at least to some extent.
They're pretty amazing organs, for sure. And, this brings us back to something we talked about earlier, how we often take breathing for granted.
Yeah, we really do.
But as we've seen in this deep dive, it's such a complex and essential process.
I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for breathing now.
That's great to hear. It's all about awareness, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Time flies when you're exploring the wonders of breathing.
It really does. Thanks for taking us on this fascinating journey.
My pleasure. I hope everyone learned something new today.
I know I did. And to our listeners, until next time, keep breathing and keep exploring.